Okay, I would like to shift the attention to policies and subsidies.
Yep.
When we, in the previous question, you mentioned the policy of the PM solution, which is, by my understanding, a central policy. And you said that the central policy will be in, it is, you said that power essentially is state control, especially the policies, regulations, everything. So, as a state of Karnataka, with the PM Surya Ghar policy, how does that interaction work, and how do these regulations and policies, subsidies, how do they kind of enhance this rooftop solar expansion, I would say?
So the center's primary hold on this thing is a financial motive, right? They have a 75,000 crore budget for rooftop solar this year. They've allocated for that, out of which 750 crore goes to awareness, and there is some incentive for discom performance in these particular things and so on. So while they can't directly say, hey, we are saying this is the rooftop solar policy, they can say, look, we'll give discoms money to do XYZ things, and through the control of money, they can influence policies to happen at the state level, right? So it's not directly saying do this; it's saying do this or else you don't get money for XYZ initiatives, right? And so the states, which is basically the Electricity Regulatory Commission in each state, KERC in case of Karnataka, is the one which actually makes the rooftop solar. I mean, so the Energy Ministry of the state, KERC, along with other stakeholders, BESCOM for example, and so on, they are the ones who actively enforce it on the ground. But they have to talk to each other, the center and the state. So for example, BESCOM is creating a portal for rooftop solar applications. BESCOM's engineers are the ones who go and install the net meters in customers' premises, right? So they are the ones who do on-ground work as far as this activity goes. But BESCOM's portal, when it's up and running and it goes live, and when PM Surya Ghar also, which is a new initiative, the systems talk to each other. There's supposed to be seamless information flow between them, right? So you upload it in a central portal, BESCOM automatically gets your application, then BESCOM sends back all the information it needs to process your subsidy, and you get money from the subsidy, which is a central government activity, right? So I think it's a fluid system. I think our Prime Minister did a very great thing by actually making this a centerpiece of his initiatives in this year. The subsidy program, there have been a few lakh applications which have already happened across India for these subsidies for the rooftop solar program. I think Assam and Gujarat are the biggest states which are leading this initiative. Now Karnataka is actually trying to catch up to those numbers and has actually released a solar policy this month with the aim of facilitating easy rooftop solar installations. Right, so every state is actually getting in line because they all see the value of rooftop solar. So one thing which I didn't mention before is that rooftop essentially uses existing infrastructure, right? If it's a large plant, you have to actually install a transmission line to wherever, to the substation, and so on. In rooftop solar, it's essentially utilizing the roof you already have with the connection to your house you already have. All you have to do is essentially upgrade your meter to make it a net meter, which is a bidirectional meter which measures power flow in both directions, right? This is something where it's fairly minimal intervention for upgrading the infrastructure for rooftop solar, right? So I think that is a huge, and discoms also see the benefit of that. I think slowly they will convert there. They have renewable purchase obligations. So RPOs are basically some portion of what they procure for electricity has to come from solar or renewables, right? They also have, there are also markets developing. So there's a whole green credit market which is developed in India, which was just launched last year, sort of like an expanded version of carbon credits, where I think energy initiatives will play a huge, will have a huge role to play. Right? So multiple things are happening parallelly, which are kind of driven sometimes centrally, sometimes from the state, but they all have to converge around the customer.
These RPOs that you mentioned, are they the same for every state, or are they different from state to state?
See, where each state is in terms of their RPO is different, as in the current status. Right? It's a certain percentage of the energy that the discoms procure has to come from renewable sources, and hopefully that number keeps increasing with time.
So, are you saying that RPOs are actually proportional to the capacity of renewables by the state?
No, they are not. I'm saying different states have to. The targets are proportional to what you're actually consuming in the state. Right? But where they are today is far away from the target. So I think there is a gap they have to address in terms of how much more renewables they can procure. So I think that's where that is a primary motivator, not just for rooftop solar, but rooftop solar is a easy way of kind of getting that to happen. Right? Now rooftop solar has from a policy perspective, rooftop solar is an interesting thing, because on an average per kilowatt or per megawatt, it offers more jobs than large scale solar.
Really?
Yeah. So we've seen this not just in India but across the globe, that because rooftop solar is a more decentralized installation process, right? The number of people it employs in the sector is a lot higher than big large plants, right? Large plants also tend to have more mechanized installations and so on. Not the case in rooftop solar. So I think there is a huge social benefit to that. There's also the aspect that it allows people, for example, local electricians, an upskilling opportunity, right? Hey, you have the basic tools to actually do rooftop solar. Why don't I bridge that with a small training, and then actually get you to install solar and increase how much you earn in a month. So there's a social angle to it, which is you're allowing for employment, you're allowing for upskilling to a much larger extent than is possible for large plants.
Okay. I would like to take you back towards the.
So by the way, just to finish my point, so it's not just a policy initiative from MNRE. There's also Ministry of Skill Development, which actively plays a role in green energy jobs. A large part of their focus is actually rooftop solar, where they want to do skill development and so on. In fact, here at the university, we've actually trained some solar installers and certified them to install solar plants. We have a system on the roof. We have access to great faculty who can actually deliver these courses. And solar installers are actually certified first. They are actually working. Our first cohort is actually installed some very good systems currently. Again, this was with Atria Power, but I think we'll keep doing these activities as time passes, right, with more and more people, because we really want to kind of take electricians and upskill them to become installers.
So skill is also a very important sector when it comes to the expansion of rooftop.
Absolutely.
I would like to bring you back to the subsidies and policies part, and I would like to ask you about the differences between the policies and regulations that India places comparing to other nations, and kind of I would like to ask you that these differences, I'm sure there are, but in terms of what are the differences that other countries other than India are upscaling their projects more and more compared to India?
So I think so in the Indian rooftop solar ecosystem has both advantages and challenges compared to other places in the globe.
Yeah.
Biggest advantage is that the cost of the system per kilowatt is very, very low in India compared to, say, the US or Australia or some place of concern. Just to give you an example, I had given a number of a 3 kilowatt system being around 60 rupees per watt. 60 to 70, it depends on the exact configuration, but let's take that number. Globally, in the US, for example, a typical system will cost around $2 to $3 per watt, which is a price of around 150 to somewhere in the range of 240 to 50 rupees, right? Sometimes it goes even more than that. That is the similar system. I mean, of course, there are some slight differences in terms of permits and infrastructure you need. It's a similar system, which is costing 60 rupees here and almost 2.5 times that number in the US. And why is that? I think some part of it has been, India has been very price conscious to begin with.
I think cost of living is also
There's cost of living, there's price consciousness, and the fact that electricity here is cheaper than, say, in the US. So the result of that is that solar has to become very cheap in order to be economically beneficial versus residential electricity, which you directly get from the grid. Right. So I think India basically has created the policies which have, for better or worse, actually driven the cost of solar fairly low, right, per kilowatt. That's great for the customers, not so great for the installers, because now you have to kind of figure out how to make money in this process. So there is good and bad for that, right? India has also created a good domestic solar ecosystem through PLIs, which are production-linked incentives and so on, which allow manufacturing of solar to happen. So I think most of the panels globally come from China, but India has essentially created a China plus one policy in a sense, where we are going down the value chain. So we used to be able to manufacture only panels. Today, solar cell manufacturing is taking off in a big way in India, and hopefully you can actually go below that to wafers and so on. Though those are much more complex processes which will take far more capital and time to set up. Right? I think there are a couple of companies who have set up or they are in the process of setting up, stuff even beyond cells. So when you say policies, right? So there are policies which affect manufacturers also, which are directly proving to be useful in creating a robust solar ecosystem in India. There are policies which are for customers, right? So net metering is an excellent example. So net metering was declared as a right of every customer, not something which the state could opt out of or do. It was just declared as a right for every customer. So every person who goes solar, residential customer has the right to actually gain access to net metering. Now, net metering is the way solar plants actually make money, right? By offsetting your electricity bills in the most efficient fashion. So I think it's been very important. The current set of policies have also made permitting extremely easy. So by the way, both the activity of making it a right and making, for example, today for a 3 kilowatt system, net metering is auto approved after a period of 15 days, right? So these are things where essentially you're simplifying bureaucracy. Whereas you go to the US, for example, the permit process is very long and quite difficult to manage, right? India also has looked at a direct subsidy to customers, whereas the US relies on what are pretty much investment tax credits. So they are refunds, they are credits to your tax. India just gives you money in your bank account, right? So they have made it super easy for people to actually go invest in solar. Again, the cost has been a huge factor in why India has been so much more interesting compared to other economies in the space, but it also proves to be challenging, right? Typically in the US, you have significantly higher quality and safety standards, right? Fire is a huge issue which they take extremely seriously. Workplace safety is something they take extremely seriously. So, and permitting, which is again a process which primarily involves you talking to your distribution company. So all of these processes are taken very seriously from a health, safety, and quality standpoint. In India, I think enforcement of these are still not very successful, which allows bad actors to abuse the system to some extent, right? So I think that you have to look at the good and the bad. I don't think anybody expects the sector to magically transform overnight, but the hope is that some of these bottlenecks will actually get resolved with time. Now,
Okay.
so let's talk the subsidy also. I think that's something you wanted to. I think you have specifically use the word subsidies also. So let me focus on that.
Okay.
I think India's subsidy structure heavily favors small systems over big systems as it stands currently. Primarily because the average Indian customer is somebody who can afford a small system but doesn't need a big one. Right? In the US, for example, the average system will be probably bigger than 10 kilowatt for a roof. There are huge roofs. There's a suburban lifestyle in most of the US which allows people to accommodate larger roofs on size. In India, the average homeowner probably has somewhere around 2 to 3 kilowatt of roof capacity and electricity demand, which they have to offset. So the system in India is focused that the subsidy actually caps off at 78,000 rupees. You want to install 3 kilowatt, you get 78,000. You want to install 10 kilowatt also, you get 78,000. So I think India has made a conscious choice to actually invest in these small scale systems across the country. The motivation for an Indian customer to install a rooftop solar versus the US is also slightly different. In the US, you're seeing a large thing about energy independence being a big factor.
Energy independence.
Yes, right. So customers, the average system is a lot more complex, larger. It usually has battery storage. So in fact, 30 to 33% of rooftop solar installs in the US now come with battery storage, like the Tesla Power.
Okay.
Or other companies also have them. So I think the Tesla is the more commonly used name there. Right. In India, we have not used energy storage as effectively as we would for these decentralized systems. To some extent, it's a price thing. The moment you introduce a battery, the system price increases significantly, and people don't want to do that. At the same time, a lot of customers already have installed UPS systems or diesel gensets in their house or office or wherever, which they rely for backup. We have to also figure out how to integrate the solar growth with replacing these inefficient assets to a large extent, which is, I think, my guess for what the next set of policies will be from the central government on this, right? Integrating storage into the mix. Discoms today are struggling because they are being asked to accept solar, but they still have to figure out what to do at night.
And I think
Battery storage, I think, resolves that to a large extent. Solar plus storage is already cost competitive with in the large scale, it's already cost competitive with coal. And it can be installed in a timeline of 18 months, 10 to 18 months, even for a very large system. Whereas a coal plant today will take 5 years to install and commission. So for the small scale systems, I would say battery storage is even more useful because it allows both the supply and demand issues to be taken care of. Right? You can supply at will when you have a battery, right? When there's a power cut, for example, and that also solves the demand problem. If you have some spike in demand, for example, you can actually use the battery to take care of that, right? So excess supply, like solar excess supply, can be stored in the battery, then essentially utilize it with after that.
Right.
So that's the holy grail in terms of creating energy independence in India also, which we have not yet come towards. But my own hunch is that the next wave of policies will focus on that, on energy storage and its integration with renewables.
Alright, so you talked about energy storage, correct?
Yeah.
In terms of energy storage, India is not that much on a competitive edge compared to other nations. But in terms of potential that we have quite more potential compared to in terms of decentralized energy as well as energy storage in the upcoming future. So based on this trend that we are seeing right now, in the next 10 years or 20 years, what do you think will be the most jobs associated with this?
See, from a skilling perspective and a jobs perspective, I think it's important to understand that my guess is that by 2027, 2028, India will stop creating coal plants. Right? I mean, whatever is already approved today will still go through. But I suspect that within 3 to 4 years, we'll stop approving new plants, which means people who are graduating in 27, 28 or so on will maybe only see maybe a year of coal plant development before it shuts down. By 2030, I think we have a target to not install any more new coal plants in that period, right?
In terms of, I would like you to clarify, in terms of coal, are you specific towards coal or generally towards fossil fuel?
See, in India, I think coal has been king for the longest time. Still today, right? I mean,
Most 70% of
correct. So I'm saying it's still king in a sense because the numbers are dropping. They're not dropping quite as fast enough as you would be comfortable from a person who looks at climate change and the results of it, right? India has always tried to take a more balanced view in its own opinion. My personal thing is that solar plus storage already has cost parity with coal, and there's plenty of literature regarding this from an Indian context. So why install a coal plant today which will take 5 years to finish?
Sure.
Just go there. And I think in a couple of years the economics will become so strong that it essentially don't have a strong incentive to actually do any new coal plants. So that's the first thing. In the energy sector also, in the clean energy space, I do see a couple of waves coming in. Today I think solar is there. In a few years time, energy storage will be absolutely mandated pretty much for any new solar installation in the large space, and will become more common in the smaller ecosystems also, right? Like rooftop solar. In a lot of cities, because of pollution, they're going to see diesel gensets being banned or restricted. It's already happened in Delhi, right? NCR, I think there is a ban on DGs and so on, except for essential institutions. All of them have to get their backup from somewhere, and solar plus storage becomes the way to kind of do that. You're also having electric vehicles which are coming in, pretty much becoming mainstream. By 2030, I don't expect fossil fuel sales to be more than 30-40% of the mix, right? That number will significantly shift. It's already shifted in that direction for commercial vehicles, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and so on. And slowly it's becoming mainstream in the two-wheeler space. It'll slowly start becoming mainstream in three-wheelers and four-wheelers also. EV charging itself is essentially just another mode of electricity consumption, right? So EV charging itself becomes a big thing across the country in terms of where you can contribute both skilled jobs as well as installation and so on, where they are more technical development of EV charging, integrating with solar, integrating with batteries to give it backup and so on, and creating the system which essentially runs the whole house on electricity, including your transportation. The last thing is that once there is an oversupply of solar, we do expect activities like green hydrogen to become way more commonplace. So, green hydrogen essentially uses electrolyzers to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and the hydrogen gets used for multiple purposes. It can be essentially used as a replacement for LPG. It can be used in many processes. It can be used to generate ammonia, which has huge implications in the say the fertilizer industry. Right? Hydrogen has a lot of challenges today, but green hydrogen becomes a way, especially fueled by cheap solar, like oversupply of solar in a sense. Right? Use electrolyzers when the sun is shining, and these huge solar parks which are where the supply is huge and the demand is not there, right? And then utilize the hydrogen for various applications. Here I see a lot of value once the solar industry has reached some level of maturity. So I expect that by 2030, green hydrogen would be probably cost competitive with the current ways of generating hydrogen, which is mainly from natural gas, and so on, and actually become the default way of generating hydrogen. Opens up enough and more opportunities to decarbonize very hard to abate sectors, right? Industrial sectors, which require still some level of, say, boilers which require natural gas or coal or something of that sort, get converted to using hydrogen, for example.
I would like to shift the focus back towards jobs. And so you are leading.
So I'm saying all of these are job creators.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Different question.
Yeah.
So you are technically currently leading the Center of Excellence at Atria University. Right?
Yeah.
Now, in terms of the center itself, and you must there must have been research areas or challenges that you are currently working on. As part of that, what skill sets that you have mentioned, as well as particular skills that you would like to promote to other students that are currently in these studying energy sciences or any electricals or any such field, would be considered ideal or would be considered the best skill sets to have if you want to tap into these kind of opportunities?
So I think the first thing that I want to point out is that the energy sector is changing so rapidly that the first thing you need is a willingness to learn quickly, right? Second thing is that you need some level of interdisciplinary education. It's not good enough to just know electrical. You need to know how the electrical system interacts with mechanical. This is true for energy, this is true for e-mobility, right? In e-mobility, the best people know how the motor runs and how it actually converts to motion in the vehicle, right? They know that actually changing the structural aspects. So, for example, reducing the weight of a vehicle, which is a mechanical problem, will actually increase the range of the vehicle, which you would think is a battery issue and therefore an electrical problem, right? So they interact with each other very closely, right? The same thing on the energy side of things. Your solar system, which is an electrical system, will fail because of the structure failing in a stop, which is a mechanical thing, purely. So I think the best people will know bits of electrical, mechanical, data, and how they work together with each other. So my first thing is, I think that can be plugged in both through formal education and through internships and actually working with projects of that sort. So we are actually helping through the Center of Excellence we're actually helping some businesses scale their businesses, right? So there's the activity which I said with Atria Power, where we are actively helping them design thoughtful systems on the technology front, which will minimize the barriers to adoption for rooftop solar. We're also working with a few other companies, which I can't name for various reasons, on other topics. For example, we are working with a couple of companies on solving the interplay of rural electrification. So one of the projects is on agri PV, which is basically how do I grow crops underneath solar panels, right? So we are actually doing that activity. So as a result of that, we do have some understanding of system level thinking for these things, right? What's causing the rooftop solar industry to not accelerate? And we are actively designing methods here to increase adoption. Our objective is to increase adoption of rooftop solar across the country. Our objective is to increase agricultural solar to happen across the country. We have teams which are working with data. They are working on the structural side of things. They are also working with solar, and what you would traditionally consider this. There's a team which works on power electronics and so on. So you can get flavors of each of them here at the Center of Excellence and try and figure out what your passion is, right? But for the most part, our idea is that we are stitching together all of this to create an ecosystem which looks at decentralized energy, so rooftop solar, energy battery storage, etc., and actually interacts with the market enough to understand what the gaps are and trying to address them, right? So I think that's the fundamental difference that we do here. We don't work in isolation on solar technologies or power electronics. We actually work as a team on all of these things, because you need all of these to make the ecosystem successful. Anybody who's looking at this sector in terms of jobs, I think India doesn't have enough technically sound people in these spaces. I would say it's a huge opportunity if people understand the technology, underlying technology, why things are happening, or something of the sort, right? And this can essentially go through hobby projects, or it can be through internships or whatever. But actually being able to understand how things work on the field, they will get employed instantly because the jobs are there. It's just that we are not able to fill them. Manufacturing is another place, right? In India, people who understand how to make solar cells or how to make batteries are so limited in number today. People who understand process engineering, that anybody who understands process engineering will almost instantly get employed in. I mean, there is way too many jobs and not enough people skilled enough to do that, right? So I think that the jobs are there, but the jobs require skill sets which are not present in traditional education systems. We want to bridge that gap, but I think if anybody has any doubts or something, they can always reach out to us. We'll be happy to bridge that skill gap.
Great, yeah. So this was the podcast. Let me summarize what the podcast entailed. We talked a lot about the rooftop solar. We saw the metrics on how it's a emerging industry. We talked about installations. We talked about client and installer relationships. We talked a lot about maintenance, policies relating to solar rooftop adoption in India, as well as we talked about how policies as well as subsidies are impact solar rooftop expansion. And in the end, we also talked about job opportunities as well as skill sets that are required for a person to be in this field. Any last messages that you have for our audience?
Look, if you're a customer, please do this immediately. It's one of the few things you can do very quickly, which has both economic value as well as helps us reach our climate goals very quickly. If you're a student, I think this sector, the green energy sector, clean energy sector, specifically solar, and the associated fields, storage, EV charging, and so on, green hydrogen, they're going to have huge opportunities as time passes. I think this is a space to actually work in and actually learn quite deep. But if you're there, it's always better to have an interdisciplinary experience, be it through education or through opportunities outside education through internships and so on. Right? So, but we need people with great technical talent, we need people with financial talent, we need people with technical talent both in the hardware side and software side. We need people with policy interest to all come together and make this a success. So I think irrespective of what your interest is, this ecosystem is a very challenging place to kind of build your careers, and that's something I would really focus on. And I would encourage that you also kind of get excited about it and work in this space. Right?
So thank you, Mr. Abhishek, for being the first guest of the Student Energy Initiative that we have. Thank you so much for your wisdom and your guidance. I'm sure not only me but other people watching this will be very much, they'll appreciate it a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And it was fun for me also.